Hello friends, welcome to the EduSat Network. Our today's topic of discussion is Women Bhakti Poets, Mira. And this will be the second lecture on Mira that we are having today. And this is part of our series on writing in India. And for this discussion, we have this in our studio, Dr. Anand Prakash, retired professor of English literature in Delhi University. He has taught for more than 4 decades from 1965 till his retirement in 2007. His publications include Wuthering Heights and Interpretation and Marxist Literary Theory, the edited volume Our Story, and a full-length study of Mukti Bodh titled Mukti Bodh in Our Time, and these are just few of his publications. Currently, he is editing the Journal of Drama Studies, an international journal of research on world drama, including translation, and the Hindi journal Yug Bhari Bodh. And with this introduction, I'd like to welcome Sir and also request him to begin our today's lecture. Thank you for coming, sir.
Thanks, Uroshi. And today's lecture, viewers, is a continuation of the earlier one, which was delivered last month on Mira, in which I introduced Mira as a poet of the medieval period in India and gave certain biographical details of the poet, knowing fully well that in the case of Mira or in the case of other poets of the period, it is difficult to find any authentic biographical information, and yet Mira's name has lived on through centuries, and this or that episode, this or that happening, this or that information has been added to the name of Mira, with the result that today we have more of a myth of Mira than Mira herself. And if one goes into the area of research in the late 15th century when she was supposed to be born, and the early 16th century, then one would realize that there are few evidences available of her birth and her actions. But then the best proof of her presence in the history of India in that period is her poetry, which has lived through centuries, and it has inspired a large number of people, particularly women, in Rajasthan and elsewhere. And in the 20th century, she is a name to reckon with, particularly with the singers of the 20th century, who have time and again taken recourse to her poetry, setting it to music and then rendering it in their very sweet voices. I say sweet because Mira's poetry is the womanly kind of poetry, and if it is subtle, and if it is somewhat critical, why somewhat? It's extremely critical. Then that subtlety and criticism shows between the lines. It's not there in the lines as much as it's there between the lines, because Mira's attitude is very sharply critical of the conventions of the period, and she doesn't mince any words either, in spite of the fact that she makes a pithy statement and goes back to her a view of being in harmony with some force, some power, some presence which is there for her. The second point, and I touched upon it last time, and that was that she belongs to the Saguna Bhakti tradition. And that tradition means that the person or God or her point of inspiration, whom she refers to again and again, is visualized in the human form. This picture in her mind of Lord Krishna, for instance, sometimes she also uses the word Ram. This picture has all the human attributes. She talks not to an idea, she talks not to a particular concept. She talks to an actual person, it seems, and that actual person is there in her mind, in her imagination. So it is this, the reference to the human attributes of the figure that she worships and wants to be with. It is that which has made her a Sagun poet. So I've gone into the details earlier about such things. So today I'll take up a few themes that are there in her poetry, and which take us closer to the kind of view that she had of the world, and also that this view was not entirely hers or of particular sections, but of a whole society at the time, And she was such a great poet, that she would grasp all the emotions, all the vibrations, cultural vibrations, etc. of the period, and then she would render them into poetic terms beautifully, very subtly, using sometimes the paradox, sometimes imagery, which will be loaded with a lot of meaning, and that's what makes Mira a poet like one. Very few exist in the Indian poetic pantheon, if can use that word. So I will say initially, the first point that I make is that Mira, like Kabir, I said, but much more than Kabir, Mira is a poet of love. She is not just a poet of faith. She is not just a poet of pursuing certain ideals. She is a poet who defines love in her own peculiar manner, and the love then takes us into a domain where freedom lies, where harmony lies, where sweetness of existence lies, where the power of the image, the power of the senses also lie. So I'll just elaborate this idea to begin with, and then I'll go on to the next point. So first, Mira as a poet of love. Now, in her case, so far as the poetry is concerned, poetic expressions are concerned, love is a link, a bridge, a relation, a moment of being together and having fulfillment. These are the different shades of meaning that I have put down on paper to help me dwell on the idea. First, as a link, she is an individual, let's say, and she wants to relate with someone, with something, and love becomes that link. So she loves the other person, she loves the other figure, she loves the other picture, she loves some presence which is active and living in her mind, and in order to have that link with him, it's a male figure. To have a link with him, then she uses love. So there are so many different ways of linking with a particular thing or a person, but then love, I believe, is the best medium through which you can communicate. It has its own language, it has its own idea, it's its own concept, and in fact one is not sure whether one is addressing someone else or whether one is addressing oneself, because the self and the other person, they get vitally linked with each other through love. So love means, for instance, that you will not hide anything, you will confess all that is there in your mind, and the other person will never ever misunderstand you. So that kind of a link is there through love between one individual and another individual or another figure, which is there so far as Mira is concerned in her mind. Then it's a relation, more than a link. You relate, you live with, you enjoy the company of, you call this person your own, you call him your friend, you call him your guide, you call him the person before whom you would bow so as to pay your respect and homage, and at the same time you'll address this person as a friend in whom you can confide. So it's not just a link between two people that they came together and they started talking to each other. It is that the poet relates with that person, and when I say relate, then I mean as an equal. Even though there's no equality between the ideal and the real human being, but then the ideal is loved, and therefore one starts relating to it at the level of equality. Then the third shade is a moment of being together. So togetherness, even when you don't talk, you know that the person is there. Even when the person is in front of you, then you know that this person will remain always, even though that feeling is sometimes momentary. It is there for a short while, then she might go into other arenas, but then because they are together, and they are together even when she is not talking, and which means that she is all the time in her life, right from the beginning till she dies, and I'll refer to that later. But all her life, all the moments of her life, she is together with him, and this togetherness gives not just the other thing, but a bonding with the figure that she is in love with, and finally having fulfillment. So when you love, when you are together with somebody, then you feel joy, and then you know that something worth happening has happened. That you will cherish it all your life. And in order to immortalize that sense of fulfillment, Mira has written poetry, and written poetry of a kind that people will sing through ages, and they will dance to the tunes and to the words that the poet would use in her poetry. So it is love has this kind of a thing, and I believe that very few in Indian poetic tradition have this kind of experience to share with the audience. Then all these things that I have so far talked about love as under the first point, they relate to the person at the human level. But then the human is so intense and is so deep that it finally becomes general. So from the particular, it goes in the direction of the general, and that's the second point, that the terms are spiritual. The terms are of course physical, but then the physical turns into the spiritual. So one starts living or feeling or experiencing at the level of the spirit, at the level of the soul, at the level of what is called deeper emotion, the deeper emotional self. And this spirit is a free spirit. It's not the spirit of a mystic in general, who is all the time thinking of some higher being, etc. This is spiritual in the sense, that the person whose company you enjoy, this person has entered your spirit, and it's a merging of souls. So there's the poet's soul, and there's the bigger soul. Well, in the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th centuries in India, this word Atma is very much there. That is what soul is, and there is a bigger Atma. There is a supreme Atma, which is called the Param Atma, or today the word is Paramatma, which is not the same thing as Paramatma. So this bigger soul and the smaller soul of the individual, they merge with each other, and this merging happens, so far as this poet is concerned, through love. And of course, I repeat the word, that it's not merely souls, it is also the body, it is also physical. So which means that the enjoyment, the fulfillment I talked about, the enjoyment that the poet feels in the company of the lover, that enjoyment is felt through senses. It's a sense of touch, it's a sense of hearing, for instance, the voice, the words of the beloved or the lover are sweet sounding to the poet, and that when she is touched, then she vibrates all over. When there is a sense of smell, all the five senses, they are involved, in the contact that she has with her Lord.
Sir, if I could interrupt you at this point, and just a doubt from my side, you talk about is that in Mira's poetry is a merging of the soul. We said say the Atma and the Paramatma, and there's also spiritual merging, but also there's a physical merging. But and Mira expresses these ideas in her poetry, but she perhaps in her circumstances could not be so expressing it so openly. So was she doing this in religious terms, expressing this?
That's in fact the excellent question. This is the point. Mira is such an intelligent person. Even though she may not have gone to school, she might have learned something from her mother or mother-in-law. But then the kind of strategy that she adopts, the strategy is that she is talking to the Lord. Now that makes it spiritual, and the actuality is that the Lord is being described in terms of the body. So Lord Krishna, who moves around with different women, and he sings to them, he plays the flute to them, he talks to them, he smiles to them, he laughs with them, he dances with them. Now all that tradition is being used by the poet, which means that she is a very deft artist, very clever person, that she is using all the tricks of the trade of a woman relating with a man in such a manner that the Lord himself becomes a human being in her imagination. So I believe it's a strategy very well adopted, and I think you are right there that it was very difficult for a woman at that point of time to have said all that Mira has said, but then Mira was a woman of courage. She belonged to a slightly higher family, and that gave her some status. Then she got some protection from her mother-in-law, as I said in the previous lecture. And then, she started meeting other people of the same, orientation. They were all bhaktas, they were all worshippers, etc. And she would mix with them, and she would dance with them. And then, people, who would criticize her, they were disarmed because she would bring in the Lord. So Mira II gives her Gopal. Now Gopal has, of course, the meaning of the cowherd, but this cowherd is a god, Lord Krishna. He himself is Gopal. So that way, and she calls him Girdhar also. Girdhar means, literally means lifting the mountain to protect men of the village, but then Girdhar also is the name of God. So talking to God and then using the physical imagery. Now this kind of a combination is rare in poetry, and she has been able to live it. So that's how I think it's a point that needed some emphasis, and you really helped me become clear about this myself. So she writes her poetry seriously. She at the same time makes it acceptable and livable. She makes it available to the audience through an idiom which the audience would interpret at different levels. So for instance, a male who has a kind of prejudice against female expression would say, well, what can I do? She's talking about God, and God is equally dear to me. And to the women who smile and say, yes, we know what he's saying. So that way kind of distinction is created between the male audience and the female audience. And secondly, and this is where your point is more relevant, there were in Mira's life specific attacks on her, and she was thought to be killed by, and in fact, as the legend has it, one doesn't know how she died, because she just one day went towards the river, and she was seen no more. She might have got drowned, she might have jumped into the river, but the kind of person that we see in her poetry would not take to suicide. So the other interpretation is that maybe somebody at that point of time pushed her into the water and she died. So, and the Rana ne bheja vish ka pyala, so she's given the cup of poison, and she drinks it and it turns into nectar. Now that is the legend, but who knows, maybe the cup changed hands, and the servant who passed on the cup to her, that person changed the drink, or told her, at least forewarned her that this Vishka Pyala should not be used. So she was a kind of thorn in the flesh of what is called the traditional view, and for this reason she was using bhakti as a kind of a means through which she would express herself in the genuine, authentic sense. So this is how I think it should be interpreted. And since we are focusing upon her poetry now, not upon her courage and other things, therefore we have strong evidence of the enjoyment and that she has while using those words, while giving those references, etc. And that enjoyment on the one side authenticates her feeling, and on the other side tells us very clearly that she is appealing to an audience at a different level. For instance, she uses the word Sakha and Sakhi again and again. And she sometimes addresses not Lord Krishna but also her Sakhi, Heri Sakhi, Mujhko Bata, something like this. Which means that she is at the same time creating an ideological base among women of the time. And imagine she was not in a soft place, in India. She was there, in a culturally very backward state, Rajasthan, where there was Sati Pratha till the other day. And people had to rise, in some kind of a revolt a few years ago to tell them that such a pratha has to be stopped. But then, and I don't blame the people there. They have been living in that tradition. So unless somebody goes and tells them clearly that this is wrong, they'll keep using it. So being a person in Rajasthan and them saying all these things, this is absolutely miraculous in terms that she was safe at least for some time. She might have been safe for 50 years or so of her life, and then there will be more criticism about her, and this criticism would have led to what I call her death prematurely. So this is the point that has to be always kept in mind, that this is the voice of courage, and at the same time this is the voice of very great intelligence, poetic intelligence. So then we from this point we move on to the next one, which is love as a statement of freedom. in times informed by convention and restrictive codes. So this in fact I was going to touch upon after that, and Urvashi, it's nice that at the right moment you raised this question, because when you read her poetry you feel free, and then this freedom, sense of freedom, comes through as a kind of voice in her poetry. There is somebody in her, there is something in her, there is an idea in her mind that expresses itself through the discourse of freedom. So she wants to be free in a world, and the world, as I told you, it's Rajasthan of the time, and Rajasthan is not just one place. At that time, it's a very big region, of different princely, areas, and different princes and kings. They vie with one another, and within the areas, they are poor and they are the rich, and the rich are very conventional. The poor also have to follow those convictions because conventions, because they are utterly in the hands of the upper classes. But then in that country she can make a statement about freedom, and this statement about freedom is couched in the poetic language, is couched in the metaphors. And when she dances around and says, well, my Lord and I are important, nobody else is important, then in a way she is saying nobody else means what? Nobody else than God himself. This means everybody in society is not hers. All people, she doesn't belong to anybody in society except Lord, who is outside society. So this kind of a thing, I'll give you the apt quote sometime later. But then it's a statement of freedom. She says, I am free, I'll do this. People who agree with me should also come and join me. So that we dance together and we sing together and we make the statement together. So this kind of a thing is there in this particular case. Then it's not conventions and restrictive codes, which are of course there. Cultural codes are there. They are intrinsic to our expression all the time. One knows that when one is making a statement, then one is using a particular word, and that word denotes certain principles. So that word which denotes principles is the code. It is written in the words somewhere. That you will do this and you will not do that, and which means that language comes under attack. Under the cultural hegemony of the period, and Mira knows how to use language. So sometimes she'll give a twist to the language. She'll play on the word. For instance, there is Garadhar Gopal Dusro na koi. Now you emphasize the word Dusro na koi, and there is a different interpretation of this. So she knows the codes, their presence, their role, and the restrictive nature, and then she knows how to tackle the problem of the impinging code, so far as she is concerned. Now then, from this general idea of conventional restrictive codes, you come to the institution of marriage, because marriage is something that is devastating for a woman in any time generally, and specifically in the medieval period, because through marriage the woman's freedom is restricted to the four walls of the home, and even within the walls she is not free. So you have right from the beginning, for instance, there is a young girl and she is being groomed to be married one day. Right from day one, the parents start saying she belongs to somebody else. And this is more true about Rajasthan, was true at least at that time, because there was a convention of child marriage in Rajasthan, and girls of 5, 6, 10, 11, etc. They would be married off, and then they would be bound by the codes of marriage, codes of children, codes of this, that, family, neighborhood, parda, and all those things. And because Mira is a poet of love and a poet of freedom, therefore she is specifically against marriage. I told you in the previous lecture that Mira did not allow for herself the consummation of marriage with the husband, who rightfully owned her in the circumstances. But then she decided not to share the bed with him, and she in fact announced as a child, as a young woman, that her only husband was Lord Krishna, whose image she would bear on her body, and she was able to assert this. That's how the legend works in the case of Mira, and which means that the conventions of marriage, the principles that determine the existence of a woman in marriage, those conventions she broke very clearly. And what better way of breaking matrimonial conventions than to imagine a lord to whom one is married. And in fact, I think I quoted the last time also, she tells her mother in one of the poems, "Maine Govind ko mol le liya." Mol le liya means I have bought him from the mela, from the fair. So she might have found an image, in the fair, and she bought that image, and then she said, "This is my husband." So, which means that no human being is worth having a husband. So far as Mira is concerned. So she will only marry God in that case. So luckily for her, she came to a house where at least the grandmother-in-law was of her orientation. She also had some sense of mysticism, and I told you in the previous lecture that she had some inspiration from that great poet Raidas, and she protected her. Even if she had not protected her, Mira would have preferred death to the kind of existence that was there in marriage. So through her words, through her images, through her capturing of pictures of excitement and of fulfillment captured in her poetry, you have the feeling that the woman does not give much credence to the idea of marriage. Then you can ask viewers on what evidence am I saying this, and that she is against marriage, because most of the evidence is not historical. It's only mythical. It's only from the legend. Well, in that case, I would suggest that the best evidence of her critique of marriage is her poetry. So read her poetry, interpret it in the context, and realize that she is talking about a freedom which is not at all ensured in marriage. Then the clue, as I say, is imagery. See the imagery, the kind of gay abandon, the kind of pleasure that she would have in the company of her Lord. And this imagery of the clouds, it's raining outside, let's go and enjoy ourselves there. And she's not bothered about the neighborhood at that time, the society at that time, the family environment at that time. So the imagery says that perhaps there are two people living on the earth. One is Mira, and the other is the Lord whom she loves. Then the imagery of air. Air doesn't require any stopping, doesn't bother about any stopping. It can always find its way to flow through. And smell, is very, very physical, very, very, sensuous. And she's using these images again and again. And this shows, that Mira is not following the conventions and codes of marital life. Then you go further and realize the role of the speaker, writer, active woman, young and mature. So always in Mira's case, either it's an innocent girl or it's a mature woman, and the mature woman is dancing with her friends, women most of the time, but she doesn't mind, I believe, even if male company is there. But because as I said earlier in the previous lecture, that certain males, certain worshippers of God, people who wanted to give themselves completely over to God, also thought of themselves as women, and this convention was there in the medieval bhakti poetry, that even males thought of themselves in terms of the female. So that way she would share the company of the males and females together, and she would dance, and like a woman saint, she would not see much of distinction between the two. So this is the speaker in her. In a way, if somebody writes poetry in the first person. I do this, I prefer this, etc. And she's doing this all the time. She's not talking about somebody else, she's talking of herself. And she puts her signature at the end of the line, like many other poets also. So Mira ke Prabhu Girdhar Naga, there's the last line. And one knows that the song and the lyric has come to an end. So it is this speaker which is deriving strength from elsewhere, but then speaking in her own voice. And this speaker is not a narrator outside Mira, this is the writer herself. It's an active person. This speaker interprets, this speaker plays with, this speaker prefers certain words to others. There are some negative words, a bunch of negativity, and there are some words which are positive. So she knows the clear distinction between what is positive and what is negative to be adopted or not adopted in life, and which means that mentally and physically she is an active person. And then she is initially when she is young, she is writing one kind of poetry, but even when she becomes mature, she remains young and energetic at heart. So you realize by reading her poetry, the best way to understand her contribution to poetry, to the cultural depth and all, critique of marriage, etc. You know that it's an active woman who is present in her writing and who is voicing all these things.
Sir, at this point I would like to ask you something. Say, you said that Mira was an active woman, active writer, also very young, and her poetry was assertive in a sense. So can we say that her love, in fact the love that she wanted from Lord Krishna was of a demanding nature? She was a demanding woman in that sense, that she did not merely sort of ask for that love and sit and wait, but she was asking for it in an authoritative manner, in a certain sense.
As a matter of her rights.
Yes,
of course. You see, when Lord Krishna is seen as Sakha, then with Sakha you can do anything you like. So she can fight with him sometimes. She can complain to him. At the same time, she can beg him. All those things. When one is in a deeper relationship, then one doesn't bother about the rightness or wrongness or validity, etc., appropriateness of a thing. So there she feels totally free. So in a free atmosphere, in an atmosphere of freedom, when she is talking to the Lord, then of course she has the equal rights. So equality and freedom, these are the benchmarks of her writing. She feels equal with the Lord, and she feels one with him, and she can take liberties with him. So that's what love is. In love there is no distinction.
True.
And if she is a true poet of love, then of course she'll talk in the tone of authority. That authority does not mean, however, that she is disrespectful and then that she can disobey, because she has the she has the ideal of God in her mind, and her ideal is actually the ideal of self. So in a way her self is ennobled when she is in the company of her lover, and this lover is God himself, Lord Krishna, and therefore she can take it as a matter of right. She is an active person. I think you have emphasized the right word. She is an active person. She is a person of conviction. She knows that what she says is right, and this gives her that kind of a confidence. I wish half of this confidence would be there in the 20th century or 21st century women who can come forward and say, mostly women of the middle class, orientation in India, here and elsewhere, they would always, expect the lover to approach them and say something to them. But here Mira is coming out of herself, and she talks to the Lord and says, "Please come, and I want to enjoy your company." I for instance, can quote a few lines. She is playing holy with Lord Krishna, and one line is "Mat dalo pichkari, main sagri bhij gayi sari." Sagri bhij gayi sari. Imagine that. Sagri means all of myself, and sari means completely. Now she is using the words so well. This is Rajasthani sweetness at its best. The sagri is the whole of me, and sari means all over. That is completely. So mat dalo pichkari mein sagri bhij gayi sari. And when Lord Krishna is aiming a pichkari at her, then of course they are playing, and in playfulness she can say this. She is telling me, God, don't do this. But at the same time, actually it's an invitation.
Yes.
So that way both things are combined. Then in another poem, there is a line called Mai. She is talking to her mother. Mane means I. Supna mein parni Gopal. Now parni means married. I had a dream in which I married my Lord. So this is a statement of matrimonial acceptance of Gopal himself. That she in the dream she married her Lord, So imagine when she is awake, then she is asserting her love. When she is dreaming, then she is dreaming about a kind of marriage with Lord Krishna himself. And then see the kind of equation she has with Lord Krishna. Mara olagya ghar aya ji. I think she is here talking not in her own voice, but in the voice of a woman who has been, waiting for her husband to come. Husband went away. He may have been there for 2 or 3 months, and she has been waiting, and he comes one day. So he ghar aya ji. And then she says, and this a woman even today would not say in public, but she can sing it. She says, "Tan ki taap miti." This is highly sensual. This is highly physical. "Tan ki taap miti, sukh paya, hil mil mangal gaya ji." So imagine the entire activity, the oneness, the equality, the freedom, and the mutuality of the woman and the man. They are, and clearly talking about what is appropriate in the bedroom. She is telling in a song, and this song will be sung later by a whole company, a whole crowd, a whole congregation. And then another thing, "Main to saavre rang rachi." Saavra is God Lord Krishna, and I am enjoying myself in his company. "Saj singar bandh pag ghungru." She has done that also in front of the Lord. She will properly, have ghungru, and singar or ornaments, etc. And lok laj taj. I don't bother about lok laj. That people have this kind of shyness. I'm not shy at all, she says. And I leave lok laj. I leave that shyness, and I danced with him. So these things very clearly show that she is in a way participating in some kind of a you can call it ritual if you like, of ritual of dance, etc. And at that point of time, she is equal to God in all respects. So active woman in that sense. Then this last question, which you already anticipated and asked it at the proper time, I would just reiterate it through the statement that I wrote down. The question can be raised, as you raised, Roshi yourself: is being a saint in the company of sadhus a strategy or a matter of convention? Generally the convention is that whenever sadhus come, and if one is a saint herself, then conventionally one is supposed to meet them and talk to them. And generally there is an address. The sadhus have come to your place, and they want your company, so you say, "Okay, come sit in front of me and I'll talk to you." And you give a sermon or a discourse. But then for her, as a saint, is it a matter of convention or a strategy that she is cleverly adopting? So this is the question that all of us have to face with respect to Mira. Is she following a convention when she talks to sadhus, or is she using that particular occasion to say something which is after her heart? How much is bhakti real, and how much is it the assertion of the human bodily desires? So real bhakti would be the bhakti that is socially acceptable. But so for her, so far as she is concerned, it's not just bhakti in that sense, but it's an expression of, in fact, assertion of human bodily desires. Is the body presented as inseparable from the religious spiritual sentiment? This is a question, and viewers, you should answer it yourself. Can you separate the body from the religious sentiment? In the case of Mira, for that matter, do they strengthen each other, the bodily and the spiritual? Do they complement each other? That one becomes the one fills the void. And a third question: are they one? So these questions get raised when we read Mira's poetry, and you can have your own answers to these questions. So far as I am concerned, I believe that Mira thinks that bhakti and the bodily desires, they are one and the same. They can't be separated. This is my answer. So I so far as the choice is concerned, I choose the last one. But there are three questions: whether they strengthen each other, whether they complement each other, or are they one? And I believe that actually they are one. Now that viewers, we have talked about Mira as a poet of love, and love having different dimensions going into society. Now let's take our attention away from Mira the poet, and think of the circumstances in which this poet emerged in the early 16th century. And Mira I call a socio-cultural and ideological phenomenon. It's not Mira who is saying all these things. It is some other force in society, actual force, material force, which is giving her the required confidence to come out in the open and say things quite freely. I am not a historian, but if you go to the books of history and if you refer to the 15th and 16th centuries, then you realize it's not the same India as existed, in the 10th century or the 9th century. In the 15th and 16th centuries, there was a kind of assertion of village life. There was a kind of assertion of small towns. There was an assertion of the poor people against the Brahmins, against the Kshatriyas, and this tension could be quite clearly seen. This is the pre-Mughal and the Mughal period, and some people would come from outside and they would see the contentions and the differences here, and they would make use of them to make their own place here, and they would be somehow supported and accepted by the Indian masses. Now, this is a historical question. I don't want to go further into it, but then I realized that India of the 15th and 16th centuries is a different India. It's an India which is producing differently, different things. It's an India where means of irrigation are much more advanced than they were earlier. So agricultural progress can be seen. There are artisans who can produce better than before, and you have these people not in the cities around the rich people. You have them in the villages, and they lead a simple life, but then they lead a life of hard work. And if they work hard and if they are creating wealth, and if that wealth finally is reaching others also, then their terms also are there. So which means that social productivity has undergone a change in this period, with the result there is a whole section of society which is looking at life differently. So they don't follow conventions, and when men and women would be living away from the cities and towns and in the villages or the fringes of the villages, and they would be interacting with people of the other village. There might be a marketplace, a mela affair, etc. Then of course that sense of freedom is created in those circumstances, which means that the 15th and 16th centuries, India is seen in these centuries as a phenomena that is becoming more and more progressive and going in the direction of advancement, and in the direction of change. And this change is captured by these Bhakti poets. So if they assert freedom in whatever way, if they want to question the existing norms, then of course they are questioning the existing social order. And this way, Mira is a product of these circumstances, that people work in one way, they'll work very hard, they'll create wealth, that wealth that then will perhaps encourage certain policies by the regime. And if the regime feels encouraged to change one's policies to become more productive, then the process has begun, and in this process people will not accept the old conventions of life. So it is this that Mira is supposed to symbolize. In this sense, Mira is not just a person but a symbol. She is a symbol of this progressive phase in India's history. I think I said it earlier also, that India in the 16th century is witnessing a kind of renaissance. It's a new learning that is coming up in India. India is not following those traditions of the 7th or 8th century. They are now interacting with people from outside also. They are learning from the people who came from outside. The people who came from outside also learned from Indians. They remained together. There was a kind of intermixing, and this intermixing would have created a new sense of learning at that time. So the person, whether it's Kabir earlier or Mira now, these persons, these human figures, they start symbolizing a general truth, and that general truth is the truth of growing up and progressing in a certain direction. Then the person as an ever-growing myth, it sweeps the followers off their feet and becomes in the process increasingly mystificatory.
Sir, sorry to interrupt you, but you gave the idea that Mira was a symbol of this progressive phase that the society was undergoing. And so was this phase very evident within the society, because not many people were as progressive or even supportive of what the Bhakti poets were saying, like Mira or Kabir. The general public was not so, could we say that the general public was not so much in support, and they had to be really say convinced of things, and these Bhakti poets had to struggle in order to put their views across and also to convince people that we need to move towards progress?
Well, just the contrary, in fact. If you go to the time, you realize that the people themselves would egg on these people to say those things. For instance, whenever there was a good crop, whenever their methods are improved, they would like to go to the fairs and they would like to enjoy. And if somebody started singing a song, then they're all start enjoying it. You see the kind of discourse that is there in Kabir. The same kind of a discourse is here also. She is addressing not herself as much as somebody else. So in fact, when I say that they are the products of time, what I am saying is that the people of the time were in fact very progressive. They were learning new knowledge. They were learning new techniques. Artisans, when artisans meet one another, then they exchange things of knowledge. So if you are working on iron, if you are working on some other metal, if you are working on cloth, if you are working on dyeing, for instance, which color and all, then a lot of research goes on. So there are teachers, then there are people who learn, etc. And in this learning and teaching process, then people actually become one, and they are very energetic. Actually, what you have in mind perhaps is that they were illiterate. Yes, they were illiterate, but illiterate only in the sense that they didn't go to schools and colleges, but they were there in the market. And when they were there in the market, they were in a position of give and take, buying and selling. And there, a lot of haggling occurs, and I'll give you less and I'll get more, etc. So when they fight and they learn from each other these tricks, then their mind gets activated.
Right.
So in fact, at that point of time, these saints would talk to this audience, and if the audience would appreciate, then only the saints would be inspired to talk more. So not that they struggled. In fact, they expressed the general energy that was generated by the passion of people to understand, passion of people to learn. Right. So maybe you differ with me.
Thank you for clarifying this one, sir.
But this thing is there, and I'm only guessing. I'm only guessing that a saint would not succeed if the saint starts saying something which is against the wishes of the people. So maybe the saint articulates the potential kind of knowledge that the humans around him or her have acquired. So he becomes a voice kind of a thing. One can, if one uses Gramsci, in order to explain this phenomena, then one would say that these artists and poets, they become intellectual to the masses. So masses require this intellect, and the saints and the poets and the visionaries, they give thought, they give voice to it. So it is this way that I would respond to this very important question that you have raised. I was then coming to the question of this ever-growing myth around such individuals. Now this would, I think, address the question still better. Somebody lives in India for 45 or 50 years, as was the case with Mira. After that, Mira could be forgotten if people didn't like her. But she was not forgotten. She was referred to again and again. I think around 1545 or so, she dies. And then, people start talking about her. People are curious to know who she was, whether she was there. Maybe there are young children, maybe there are 14, 15 years old. They would say, I heard of Mira, how was she? And then somebody will say, oh, Mira, I saw her. And then the story will be told about Mira. And if the story is told, then the storyteller himself, adds a few things to this. And after 50 years, when nobody is around who has seen Mira, then a different kind of a story about the same person will be told. Which means that the person is growing in stature in the minds of people. So it is this way that hagiography develops in such societies as India's. And even today, people talk about Mira, and they keep on adding their own versions. I heard a version myself, which was given perhaps I think 50 years ago, or maybe even before, that there was one of the persons, who was a crook, and he came in the garb of a saint, and he wanted to seduce Mira. Mira was a very attractive woman, and he said, well, I am Lord Krishna, I am a Bhakt of Lord Krishna, and my Lord also the same, so let's spend some time together. And he started, talking in a very seducing kind of attitude, and he said, and then Mira very quietly, coolly said to him, these days I don't talk in private. He said, if you have to say something, I'm a public figure, and if you want to, be physically intimate with me, and if you want to say that, you are Lord Krishna, then we'll be, intimate in full public view. And the man ran away from there. So it's a story, I believe. I don't know whether it happened or not, but then such stories are added to this. Because a woman can say all these things, and the man didn't know where to look. So he said, I'm a public figure now. So all these stories, that they get added to the person. So this is his geography, which means today that we are discussing Mira, and we are taking 2 lectures to discuss, it only shows, that Mira is relevant.
Absolutely.
Through
So
this
in
time.
fact, I was going to say that I have heard the same story. Yes, so it's
Yes, it's there.
widely circulating.
Yes,
sir.
it's circulating these days. So nobody writes biographies of such people. People didn't have a wherewithal. I've heard, some biographical details of Emperor Akbar at the time. Some people who saw him, they took notes and they wrote down, and they are published today. But there will be nobody, in Rajasthan or in the case of a simple soul like Mira, to write it down. But then people talk about it. And as they talk, the story grows. And it grows to only prove the popularity of the figure that we are talking about. So this is what Mira is at that point of time. I think I have more or less reached the end of the argument. She is a poet of love, and she is a poet, who represents the, trends of the period that produced her. And she still grows, in the minds of the people who read who read her, and who talk about her, who offer an appreciation of her. And I will, end this discussion with another quotation from her poem. And she says, just see how she balances one with the other. She says, "Main to Hari Charnan ki dasi." I just, touch the feet of, and I worship the feet of the God, Lord Krishna. मैं तो हरि चरणन की दासी. अब मैं काहे जाऊं काशी? Why should I go to Kashi or Banaras? Now see, the first one is very meek and obedient kind of a voice, confessing that she is a slave of God. And the second one, she says, I am against all conventions. I don't want to go to Kashi. My Kashi is my home, where I meet my God. So this kind of a very strong statement is couched in this language, and in the same line she is saying 2 things. So that's how the saint poet and the intelligent poet and the woman, the active woman, these combine, and the figure of such a person looms large before our eyes, and we feel in fact elated and happy that such a person as Mira was born in India, and that she inspired generations of readers and others. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, and also for summing it up for us. And so, friends, today was the second lecture on Mira. In fact, a very productive discussion we also had today, and we looked at Mira as a poet of love, Mira as a socio-cultural and ideological phenomenon, and we also, sir also read out some of her poetry. So, friends, with this I'd like to bring the lecture to a close, and our next lecture with sir will be on Lal Ded, so stay tuned in for that. And again then, thank you so much, sir, for being here, and thank you, wonderful viewers. Thank you, and
Thanks,
have a great
Roshi.
day. Thank you, sir.